Thank you so much. The first time I met Marion, she was running down the street of Greenwood, Mississippi, screaming, "Where's the payphone? Where's the payphone? I got to call the Justice Department." And I looked around at her. I was intrigued by the fact that a black woman knew someone to call in the Justice Department. I was not about to rush to help her find the phone. I just took notice. You know someone in the Justice Department? In Mississippi, in the Delta of Greenwood in 1963. It was spring break, and she had just come down for spring break to work from Yale Law School, where she was a student. So after I took great measure of the fact that here was a black woman, a young, fine young black woman, she was fancy, who knew someone in the Justice Department to call, because we didn't know. We knew who our supposed congressmen were. We wouldn't dare go to their office and ask them for any dischargement of their responsibility toward us. But so I finally turned around and said, "Okay, I'll take you to the payphone." She said, "I got to call the Justice Department because the police are turning loose the dogs on demonstrators." And I said, "Yes, they are." I think it was probably the first time you'd seen that. And then she told me years later, after she got John Doerr on the phone, he said, "Calm down and tell me what happened." Because she was on all cylinders, as was I. I mean, I was standing there looking to see, let's see how this plays out, you know? But I am deeply humbled and grateful to be honored tonight by the Mississippi Center for Justice. And I'm especially pleased to have been introduced by Marion, whom I met back there in 1963. I'm also honored to receive this award along with Robert Rabin, whose legal work in Mississippi surely informed the racial justice work he is doing through the March on Washington Film Festival, and that his firm is doing in other ways in DC as well. I grew up in a small, all-black community of a few hundred people called Palmer's Crossing, outside Hattiesburg, Mississippi. It's 4 miles from downtown. By the time I got to college, I had been a member of the NAACP Youth Council in Hattiesburg, and was mentored by Clyde Kennard and Medgar Evers, as well as Vernon Damer, all of whom were martyrs for the civil rights movement. By the time I got to Jackson State, soon afterwards, I was expelled. My sister Dory and I were expelled for participating in a civil rights protest. See, the Tougaloo College students had been arrested and for sitting in at the public library. And Medgar had told Dory and me to try to get students to meet in some kind of a sympathy protest. We and other students did so that night on campus, and the president of the college, Reddix, came over and slapped my roommate, knocked her to the ground. And a few weeks later, we were told that we were expelled. We were 17 and 18 years old, and not to be outdone, so we told the dean, "We're glad, we hate this place. You're stricter than mother." And we're going to Tougaloo. We hadn't talked to our folks at all about transferring. But I was so happy to be, it was a blessing in disguise, because to go to Tougaloo College was the most important thing that could have happened in my young life, because Tougaloo gave me my wings to fly. The only liberal arts college in Mississippi, black liberal arts college, and the place that is now known as the Civil Rights College, because any and everyone came to Tougaloo. It was the only place where integrated groups could meet. At that time, there were only 3 or 4 black lawyers in the entire state. three of whom handled civil rights cases. They were R.J. Brown, Jack Young, and Carsey Hall. There was another, and two of them had read for the bar, and one had gone to law school. R.J. Brown went to law school. There was a fourth lawyer, but he only handled the weekend drunk cases. In 1961, when the Freedom Riders came, it was just Brown, and Carsey Hall, and Jack Young who represented them. It was these three lawyers who defended most of the civil rights workers throughout. Most African Americans had no legal representation. Three black lawyers were located in Jackson, and even if people wanted to hire them, they was out of their reach. It was heresy for an African American to file a complaint against a white person. In 1959, I remember when we pinned such high hopes on R.J. Brown because we expected that he would exonerate a young black man named Mac Charles Parker, who was jailed in Poplarville for allegedly raping a white woman. You see, this occurred 15 to 20 miles from my home. Attorney Brown didn't save Mac Parker because he was dragged from his jail cell and lynched before the trial. The ranks of these three lawyers grew enormously in 1964 when the Legal Defense Fund's Marion Wright Edelman came and opened an office in Jackson. When the Lawyers Committee brought students and lawyers to the state, when Mississippi Freedom Summer arrived and hundreds of mostly white students came to volunteer for that summer, the Lawyers Guild and others provided representation. Awards are given to individuals, but so many others help them to achieve them. That was certainly the case with me, because Mississippi civil rights organizers and activists whom I knew, such as Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, Marion Wright Edelman, of course, Bob Moses come to mind. Three of my civil rights mentors, Vernon Damer, who died because his home was firebombed and shot into by the Klan, Clyde Kennard, who was framed and sent to Parchman Penitentiary for receiving stolen property of about $6, $7 worth of chicken feed, sent to prison for 7 years, and was released only weeks, I would say a couple of months before he died of stomach cancer. And of course, Medgar Evers, whom I had known since high school when he came to Hattiesburg to organize our NAACP youth chapter. I knew two of the three civil rights workers who were murdered in the summer of '64. They were my friends. I was a member of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that Marion mentioned. We called ourselves the Green Beret because we were bad, young, courageous, break all rules people, young people. Bob Moses has said that we were a group of about 30 young people throughout Mississippi who were determined to get the right to vote for all Mississippians. The numbers were never very large. But during that time, I failed the voter registration literacy test 3 times when I was in college. The voting registrar, the infamous Theron Lynn, failed the vast majority of African Americans and passed. In fact, he would get on his phone and call white people to say, "You're registered now." I was finally registered to vote by a federal court order. In other words, the struggle waged by my generation made life better for some of those that followed. Yet there are still a lot of problems that I did not anticipate almost 60 years ago. The plight of poor children in Mississippi is as bad as it is in some developing countries. And you heard testimony to that tonight. Poverty and unemployment, opiate addiction, massive incarcerations of black men and women, high school dropout and high unemployment rates, and the fact that most of the wealth is still concentrated in the hands of a few whites, as well as the wanton disregard for black lives by the police are still some of the problems that exist. Yet, in closing, I'm grateful that Riley Morris and his staff and board at the Mississippi Center for Justice is giving a measure of hope through legal services to those who truly need them. And although we have graduated from voting rights to the infinitely more complicated, more complex issues that your staff raised here tonight, I remain optimistic, because what else do we have but to be hopeful? Thank you.